Inchai Comic Guy here with another Comicsgate unboxing, and today we actually have a digital copy that we're going to be reviewing. This one is The Last Goodbye from Forest Publishing. It was written by Richard Embree, with art by Brian Brinley, and with lettering by Eric Weather. Not really going to go into the colorist, mostly because I'm not going to have a whole lot to say that's positive. And I just don't feel like putting the guy's name out there just to tear him down. I mean, he can do better. He can learn to do better. So we'll just talk about the colors in the abstract without like talking about one specific person. But this is a rare instance in which a Comicsgate book actually has an editor, a Dane Lamont. So, hey, that's something we don't see very often here in Comicsgate, and it's worth mentioning. So what is The Last Goodbye? Well, The Last Goodbye is, a standard one-shot comic book. It's not going to be part of an ongoing series, at least as far as I can tell. But I've got to say, Richard Embree, bravo. This was a really, really well-written comic book. You grabbed my attention from the very, very first page and the first opening line of dialogue on the page. And I was just blown away. This was a really well-written book, and I thoroughly enjoyed reading every single moment of it. So let's go ahead and let's talk about what this book is about. This book is essentially about two ships passing in the night, specifically the life of Edgar Cruz and the life of Ana Hernandez. And I have to say, this also made me really like this book because they were both Latino, and being Latino, that put a smile on my face. It's nice to see some representation for my peoples. But beyond that little touch of bias, this is a really well-written story about the life of Edgar Cruz, a bad guy who wants to be a good guy, and Ana Hernandez, a young woman, single mother, who is pretty much at her wit's end as tragedy is entering her life. And Edgar making a choice that still is in keeping with him being a bad guy, but does have a very redemptive quality of it. The writing in this book by Richard Embree was spectacular. This guy knew how to craft a narrative. He knew how to go ahead and introduce us to characters that we immediately had an emotional connection to. Richard Embree, fantastic writing. I mean, there was a couple of disjointed parts about it because it's kind of told in the same fashion as, say, Reservoir Dogs, so the continuity is all jumbled throughout the entire book. Now, I personally am not a fan of that particular writing style, but at least Richard Embree was able to pull it off effectively. And I'm going to give the writing in this book 4 out of 5 stars. This was incredibly well done, and I would actually love to see what Richard Embree can do with long-form storytelling. Because this was just a one-shot, and how effectively he put together this story for, 22-page comic book? Absolutely fantastic. His story was good, his prose were good, his plot was on point. Again, it's not easy to tell a story in a disjointed fashion, and in this case, it really didn't bug me that much, so I was good with it throughout the entire experience. Richard Embree, if there is an upcoming star as far as writing is concerned, I'm already on the Richard Embree fanboy train because this guy was good. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate a well-written comic book. This was a breath of fresh air. Which leads me now into the art. The art was done by one Brian Brinley, not to be confused with Richard Embree. That last name is very similar, so at a first glance, I thought they might be brothers until I realized I was putting one guy's name with the other guy. But yeah, Brian Brinley did a great job on the artwork. It's not John Malin quality, but I don't think anyone would be expecting that from a book like this. But it is certainly a really, really well done artwork. It's solid artwork. There's a couple of small issues with as far as, body proportions are concerned, but that's really not much of a negative as far as this book is concerned. I still really like the artwork throughout the entire book. Could have used a little bit more detail, but when you consider that, I think this might be some early work from Brian Brindley, that there's plenty of room for growth here. I mean, this was really, really solid. I'm going to give Brian Brindley 3 out of 5 stars. This is industry standard artwork, on par, in my opinion, with anything that you would see over at DC or Marvel. So this is really quality work from Brian Brindley, and again, I got to give you 2 thumbs up. Really, really solid artwork that told Richard Embree's story effectively. Once again, bravo. Emotionally, I have to admit, part of me wanted to give Brian Brindley a 4, but he's just not there yet. It's clear to me from his artwork that he is trying to tell a realistic tale, which is why a lot of the body movements and poses in each scene doesn't get too wacky, crazy, or all superhero on you. But there was the issue that we have a lot of medium shots, we don't have very many close-up, we don't have very many long shots, and that did have the effect of making some of the artwork appear a little bit flat. But this just comes with experience. As far as I can tell, Brian Brindley is just starting out, because I've not heard of him working on any other project, but there's a lot of positive room for growth and a really strong foundation for him as an artist to go ahead and develop and master his skill. Normally we would go ahead and we'd talk about the colors, but I'm going to hold off on that. And instead, we're going to talk about Eric Weathers, because yes, it's a Comicsgate book. It's a Comicsgate book, so of course Eric Weathers must be here. And you know what? It's always good to see Eric Weathers on a comic book, because I know that the lettering is going to be solid every single time. It makes me wonder if Eric Weathers might be wearing himself a little bit thin. But yeah, this is a 3 out of 5 as far as the lettering is concerned. Solid industry standard lettering that puts a smile on your face, because there's nothing about the lettering that's going to detract from the story or from the artwork. So thumbs up to Eric Weathers. Eric Weathers on his worst day would never do less than a 3 out of 5 on any comic book. And this, unfortunately, brings me to 2 of the negative aspects of the book. First off, we're going to talk about Dane Lamont. Dane, you messed up on a couple little things here, and the biggest thing that you messed up on is on one of the pages, Ana Hernandez is labeled down as Ana Martinez. Now, if there was supposed to be some missing dialogue in here where she talks about the difference between that being her last name versus her married name or something like that, I don't know, but it's not in the book. So that's a mistake. Dane, your job is to catch these kind of mistakes and prevent these kind of mistakes from going to print. So right there, you done messed up. I mean, if we actually graded editors on their job, which we don't in Comicsgate because there's so few editors, that definitely would have gotten you a point off. But I imagine that Dane also is responsible for getting this book printed, for getting it out the door, to making sure all the crowdfunding is done. So I'm not going to beat up on the guy too much, but Dane, we're watching you, and we will notice when these type of mistakes happen. And because you're the editor, I also blame you for what we're going to talk about next. And that is, unfortunately, the coloring. The coloring in this book, I'll just say it, it's terrible. I freely admit, maybe it's just because I have a digital copy and I don't have a print copy, and maybe that would change some of this. But the colors are way, way too bright for this kind of story. The colors are just so oversaturated that it actually ends up detracting from the quality of the artwork and the quality of the story. And unfortunately, there are just a lot of little mistakes throughout the entire book when it comes specifically to the coloring that just drove me up a tree. It's like my brain is immediately catching onto all these little problems, and it literally distracted me throughout the entire book. I mean, Richard Embree's story was so good that I was able to stay focused on it, but the coloring in the book certainly detracted from the quality of the artwork, and that is no bueno. I'm not going to get in too many details here, but let me go ahead and show you this page. Do you see the background here in this page, right here, while they're in a diner? Now, as near as I can tell, this is happening in, I don't know, the daytime. The guy mentioned that this is during the lunch hour. And I don't know if it's the lunch hour for people working at night or if it's actually the lunch hour, because the coloring for the windows doesn't give us any indication of what's actually going on outside. We can't tell if this is daytime or nighttime, or this is just the glare from the lights inside of the building coming off of the windows. It's just overdone. It's overwrought. On top of that, the lighting's all wrong. The lighting in a diner, heck, in any domicile, is going to be from the top to the bottom. So could someone please explain to me why in these panels the primary light source appears to be coming from the floor? Look at the background. You have lighter colors on the bottom, deeper colors on the top. That is not how light works, and that is certainly not how light's going to work inside of some diner, some dive diner no less. You can't do that. I mean, your brain picks up on this type of thing. So when you see a colorist screw that up, you may not pick up on it consciously, but your subconscious mind does, and it ruins the scene. It takes you out of the moment because something is wrong and your brain is trying to figure it out, and it takes you out of the book. And this is one of multiple problems throughout this entire book. In fact, we have this scene right here where our main character, Edgar Cruz, is coming out of juvenile detention when he turns like 17, 18, but the coloring that was used on him makes him look like the version we have at the end of the story, which is like in his like 30s or something. So it just doesn't work, and your mind picks up on these little problems created by the colorist. And again, I can't really put all the blame on the colorist, which is why I'm not mentioning the guy by name. I think the guy made mistakes. He certainly tried. I mean, you can tell an effort was being made, but there's just these fundamental errors as far as the coloring is concerned that were causing problems. And Dane, you're the one who should have caught these errors at the beginning and made sure it didn't go to print with those problems. I have to admit, my mind is shifting as far as the score here is concerned between whether or not I should give the coloring a 1 or a 2. Going over it in my mind, I have to admit, I'm leaning towards a 2. Because it just could be this guy's new, he doesn't have a lot of experience, he doesn't recognize some of these problems when coloring an environment for a comic book. On top of that, clearly Dane dropped the ball because as editor, he should have made sure these issues were addressed before going to print. You know, the guy's probably just starting out because again, this is someone I've not heard of before. I haven't seen him color anything else. It could be that, you know, again, this was a learning experience for the guy, which is why I don't want to use his name. I don't want to tear this poor guy down. Yes, I'm sorry, sir. I am tearing down your work, but that's because there are flaws and problems in your work. It's not personal. It is just factual. So, you know what? I'm going to make it. It's a 2. I'm going to give the colorist a 2 because it's not all of its fault. Dane, you should have caught this. Dane contributes to this in the fact that as editor, he had a responsibility to make sure that the colorist was on spot as far as the colors were concerned and offered feedback to make sure that the colors complemented Brian Brindley's artwork and Richard Embree's story. So yeah, I'm going to give the colorist 2 out of 5 stars. I really hope though that this was a good learning experience and that he can take a bit of critique so that he can come back and do an even better job the next time he colors a comic book. Because clearly there's a lot of talent there as a colorist, and you can tell he made an effort. There's just some of these fundamental little problems that, kind of detracted from the work. Because this is a digital comic book, there is no packaging, so there will be no scorecard for that. We've got writing, we got lettering, we got coloring and interior art. The cover art was done by the same person who did the primary artwork, Brian Brindley, and it's flat. It's not great. Again, the coloring is not that great either, which kind of makes the cover look even worse. It's way too bright. These are all problems that I've addressed earlier in the video, but I've got to say the cover, I think that's the weakest part of all of his artwork for the entire book, because the cover, it's flat. I mean, it's a 3 out of 5 as far as the cover artwork is concerned. And I wish that he had done something a little bit more compelling, a little bit more interesting. I mean, there are several things that are more noirish that he could have gone as far as a direction for the cover artwork. But, hey, I wasn't there. And I got to admit, Dane, I'm going to blame you. Doesn't it feel good to be an editor, Mr. Lamont? That's the thing about editing. You always take all the crap from everybody. And of course, when we add everything up, we come up with a final score of 3 out of 5. This is an average comic book when you take all factors into consideration. But when I just take into consideration Richard Embree's writing, I gotta say, I mean, in my heart, I feel like this is a 5. That's how good it is. That's how well written it is. Richard Embree's story elevates everything in the book. I mean, this guy got a 4. He got a 4 in writing out of me. So, that says a lot. I think Brian Brindley has a lot of room for growth, and I think he's going to become an impeccable illustrator. The colorist, I think that with some time, some effort, and taking this feedback and critique and applying it to your work, you're going to be able to go ahead and evolve to become a really competent colorist as well. I think Eric Weathers is Eric Weathers. What negative thing is there to say? And Dane Lamont, you caught all the crap because, hey, that's what happens to editors. But The Last Goodbye is certainly a wonderful, wonderful book and one of the best outings I've had from Comicsgate in quite some time. It's well written and thoroughly enjoyable. I think everybody should go ahead and keep an eye on Forest Publishing and the work of Richard Embree, Brian Brindley, and, I will say it, Dane Lamont. He's got some learning to do too. And this was just really, really good. This is a solid comic book, and this is emblematic of, in my opinion, the superior quality that you can get out of Comicsgate. I know that sounds weird because this is a 3 out of 5 book, but that's a 3 out of 5 book made by people new to the industry. Or at the very least, I should say, new to me. And I believe that these guys, give them a couple of months, give them a couple of years. These guys are going to be pumping out books that are 4.5 stars out of 5 in no time flat, because they are building up the skills and knowledge they need to grow and be even better with every single book. So keep an eye on Forest Publishing Comicsgate, because I've actually got some really, really high hopes for these guys.